Welcome back to the channel. Today we enter the final and most devastating chapter of 1984, Room 101. The thing that is in Room 101 is the worst thing in the world. But what happens when that worst thing breaks a man completely, when survival demands betrayal of the very person you once loved most? Is there any piece of humanity left after that? Stick with us, and don't forget to subscribe, so you won't miss the reflections we'll draw at the end of this journey. Winston Smith, once a quiet rebel nurturing forbidden thoughts of freedom, is now confined to the darkest depths of the Ministry of Love. He recognizes, or imagines he recognizes, his position in the building by the changes in air pressure, a small symbolic illusion of control in a place designed to strip it away. He is seated, immobile, in a chair that holds him upright, head clamped forward, eyes fixed on two green baize tables. A silence looms before the door creaks open, and O'Brien, the orchestrator of his reconditioning, enters. The question once asked, "What is in Room 101?" is finally answered. The worst thing in the world, O'Brien says. But that terror differs from person to person. For Winston, it is rats. O'Brien's voice is calm, clinical, cruel in its precision. He unveils a wire cage, split into two compartments, each containing a rat and attached to a face-conforming mask. Winston understands with sickening clarity that these creatures will be released directly onto his face. The mere image of them, the pungent scent that reaches him, collapses his reason. In Room 101, it is not just pain that is inflicted, it is psychological obliteration. O'Brien speaks not just as a torturer, but as a philosopher of control. He explains that everyone has a breaking point beyond courage or cowardice. The rats are Winston's. In desperation, as the mask approaches, Winston loses all pretenses. Panic tears through him. There is only one way to escape: shift the suffering onto another. And so he betrays Julia not abstractly, but explicitly, completely. "Do it to Julia," he screams, "not me." In that moment, the resistance that had defined him collapses. The betrayal is not a strategy. It is real. It is wanted. And then blackness. He falls not physically, but into the void of self-loss. He is still restrained, but spiritually, he has been severed from his former self. Time passes. The scene changes. Now Winston spends his days in the Chestnut Tree Cafe, a haunt for discarded men. He is changed, physically bloated, emotionally numbed. He drinks victory gin not for pleasure but for sedation. The telescreens hum, the waiters serve without orders, and he plays chess without truly thinking. The once sharp clarity of rebellion has dissolved into a dull stupor. He receives small tasks from the Ministry of Truth-absurd bureaucratic routines about punctuation placement. He accepts them, for there is nothing else to do. Winston has seen Julia again, by chance, in a park stripped of life by the cold winds of March. Their reunion is void of intimacy. They exchange no warmth, only confessions of betrayal. Both acknowledge that in the moment of horror, they truly wanted the other to suffer. Their bodies have changed, their souls even more. They part not in sorrow but in disinterest. Whatever had once connected them has been eradicated. Back at the cafe, Winston traces the party's arithmetic in the dust. 2 + 2. He remembers her voice once declaring, "They can't get inside you." But they could, and they did. O'Brien's prophecy had come true. What happens to you here is forever. The mutilation is complete. Winston no longer belongs to himself. The telescreen announces a special bulletin. A trumpet blast follows, always a sign of victory. The Eurasian front collapses. A triumphant voice delivers phrases of conquest booty, prisoners, perfect coordination. Outside, a roar of cheering floods the air, but Winston does not move. Internally, however, he is racing with them, a phantom among the loyal. His former uncertainty dissolves. At last, he feels the final change. He loves Big Brother. He gazes up at the portrait, massive and unchanging. Tears of submission streaked down his cheeks. What once was resistance, then defeat, is now exultation. Winston has won. The war within him is over, not because he conquered, but because he has been conquered. He is no longer a man with a soul that wrestles against power. He is a man remade by it. He belongs entirely to the party. His love is no longer real love, but manufactured allegiance. Still, it is complete. But what does it truly mean to love Big Brother? It is not affection, nor admiration, nor even belief. It is obliteration. The love that Winston feels is not his own. It is a love imposed, manufactured, chiseled into his psyche through fear, guilt, and annihilation. It is the love of the prisoner for his jailer, the slave for his master, the shattered for the hammer that broke him. Orwell does not present this love as tragic, he presents it as inevitable. This final stage of Winston's transformation is not loud, not violent, not grand. It is subtle, quiet, wrapped in routine and repetition. The telescreen announces empty victories, and Winston drinks. The chessboard is reset, and he plays. The waiters fill his glass, and he doesn't resist. He is no longer aware of being watched, because he has become the watcher. The doctrine of the party has not only triumphed over his actions, it has colonized his thoughts, emotions, and memories. The image of the white knight always mating, always triumphing, becomes a grotesque parody of morality. Winston once questioned the party's version of truth. Now he accepts it completely, not because it makes sense, but because it is safer, easier. The past has been rewritten, the present orchestrated, and the future dictated. His own past, the warm memory of playing snakes and ladders with his mother, he dismisses as false, a trick of the mind. What matters is not what was, but what the party says was. There is no history, only narrative. No identity, only roles. In that sense, Room 101 was not just a torture chamber, it was a crucible. It melted down the core of the human spirit and recast it into something predictable, loyal, and empty. The betrayal of Julia was not simply a personal failure, it was the ultimate success of the system. Winston could never love her again, not because he did not want to, but because he no longer could. Even their last conversation, bleak and unfeeling, shows how thorough the psychological damage is. She crushes a twig beneath her boot, a small, deliberate gesture of dismissal, and Winston watches, detached. They are no longer lovers, comrades, or even acquaintances. They are casualties who survived, only to find that survival had cost them their souls. And yet Orwell's genius lies in the deceptive serenity of this ending. There are no sirens, no executions, no final cries for freedom. There is only the quiet hum of the telescreen, the smell of gin, the clink of chess pieces. Victory does not arrive with fanfare, but with routine. Compliance becomes comfort. The bullet, perhaps metaphorical, perhaps literal, brings not pain, but peace. This chapter is not just the conclusion of Winston's story, it is a mirror held up to the reader. What would we do in Room 101? What part of ourselves could we sacrifice to survive? And if we did, what would remain of us? As Winston sits, gazing at the massive, unblinking face of Big Brother, he does not weep for what was lost. He weeps for what was gained, a state of being in which no contradiction exists, no resistance lingers, and no questions are asked. The face that watches him is not merely authoritarian, it is eternal, immune to time, to doubt, to failure. Thus ends the journey, not with freedom, but with finality, not with hope, but with surrender. Orwell's bleak vision offers no escape, no loophole, no rebellion that survives. It only offers the terrifying clarity that, in the world of 1984, the greatest victory is to destroy a man so completely that he loves the very force that destroyed him. In the final chapters of 1984, George Orwell presents not just the end of a man's story, but the end of the self. Winston Smith, once a quiet rebel who clung to memory, love, and truth, now finds himself at the deepest level of the ministry of love, both literally and metaphorically. At each stage of his imprisonment, he had known, or seemed to know, whereabouts he was in the windowless building, the narrator tells us. But here, in this final place, he is as far beneath the surface as Orwell's vision can go. It is not a prison of iron bars, but a prison of fear, silence, and transformation. Winston is strapped to a chair, unable to move, not even his head. In front of him are two green-covered tables, and on one of them soon sits the object of his most personal horror. O'Brien enters with calm authority. "You asked me once," he says, "what was in room 101? I told you that you knew the answer already. Everyone knows it. The thing that is in room 101 is the worst thing in the world." That phrase echoes with finality, the worst thing in the world. For Winston, that thing is rats. O'Brien's lesson is clear and precise. Fear is personal, and it is total. The worst thing in the world, he continues, varies from individual to individual. It may be burial alive, or death by fire, or by drowning, but for you, it is rats. Orwell is not describing physical torture alone, he is exploring psychological annihilation. Room 101 is the place where all resistance ends, not because a body fails, but because the mind is broken. As the wire cage is prepared, Winston pleads in a high, cracked voice, "You can't do that. You couldn't. You couldn't. It's impossible." But impossibility does not exist in this world. There is no limit to what can be done to a human being when control is complete. O'Brien, speaking like a lecturer to an invisible class, explains, "Pain is not always enough. There are occasions when a human being will stand out against pain, even to the point of death. But for everyone, there is something unendurable. You will do what is required of you." And Winston does. As the rats approach, as panic turns to blackness, a final desperate thought takes shape in his mind. There was one and only one way to save himself, Orwell writes. He must interpose another human being between himself and the rats. And so he screams over and over, "Do it to Julia! Do it to Julia! Not me! Julia!" This is not a calculated betrayal, it is a sincere one. The party has succeeded. The last tie to humanity is severed. The story shifts. Winston is no longer in room 101. He is back in the world, but he is not the same. He spends his days at the Chestnut Tree Cafe, drinking victory gin, playing meaningless games of chess, and staring blankly at the telescreen. The man who once wrote in his diary, "Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 make 4, now traces 2 + 2 = 5 into the dust without irony. He no longer questions the lie. He embraces it. His reunion with Julia is quiet, awkward, and empty. "I betrayed you," she says. "I betrayed you," he replies. They sit together but feel nothing. After that, she says, "You don't feel the same toward the other person." And he agrees. "No," he says, "you don't feel the same." The party has not only destroyed their love, it has made it irrelevant. Even the memory of affection has been cauterized. What remains is not peace, but the illusion of it. Winston's body is bloated, his lips purple from drink. He still receives money. He still has a job, although no one seems to care whether he does anything. He plays with chess pieces and listens for bulletins about distant wars. The telescreen announces that the war in Africa has turned. A great victory has been won. White always mates, Winston thinks as he stares at a chess problem. And this too is a metaphor. In Orwell's world, white always wins, but white is not the symbol of moral good. It is the symbol of the party's unrelenting dominance. The final transformation is not a scream, but a whisper. As Winston watches the crowds cheer the victory, he imagines himself among them. He imagines running, shouting, celebrating. But in reality, he sits motionless, tears on his cheeks. He has not been forced into submission. He has arrived there by choice, or at least by what remains of choice. And so in the last line of the novel, Orwell writes, he had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother. These words are not triumphant. They are chilling. The party does not seek obedience, it seeks love. Not out of affection, but out of total conquest. The soul must be rewritten. Truth must be destroyed. The message that Orwell offers is not about a single man or even a single regime. It is about what happens when power becomes absolute and fear becomes policy. The world of 1984 is terrifying, not because it is alien, but because it is familiar. Surveillance, propaganda, emotional manipulation. These are not distant concepts. They are present realities, magnified in Orwell's fiction. The lesson is profound. When fear controls us, love becomes fragile. When truth is decided by force, freedom vanishes not with violence, but with silence. Winston's fate is a warning that the greatest danger is not just that we might be controlled, but that we might learn to love our chains. Orwell leaves readers not with closure, but with a mirror. The question is no longer what happened to Winston. The question is, how far are we from room 101 ourselves? And when we face our worst fears, what will we do to survive? In the final act of 1984, George Orwell does not merely close a story, he lays bare a truth that stretches far beyond fiction. What begins as a depiction of external control slowly evolves into an examination of internal surrender. And as Winston Smith submits to the mask, the rats, and ultimately to betrayal, readers are not invited to judge him, but to examine themselves. Because what Orwell offers is not only a warning, it is a question. What would we have done if placed in room 101? Fear, above all else, reveals the limits of our convictions. It does not invent betrayal, but brings it into light. Winston's cry, "Do it to Julia, not me," is not calculated. It is pure instinct, a scream from the deepest recess of the self. In that moment, Winston doesn't weigh consequences, doesn't fake compliance, he means it. Orwell is not condemning him, but showing that the most powerful regimes are those that do not merely punish disobedience, but rewire love itself. And when fear becomes the defining environment of the soul, principles collapse. People do not betray because they are weak, but because they are made vulnerable. This is the first lesson Orwell places before us. Courage is not infinite. Even the noblest of hearts can be twisted by terror. And when fear invades love, even the strongest connections erode. The implication is chilling. Not just that we are breakable, but that we are reprogrammable. From fear, Orwell turns to truth. In one of the most disturbing transformations of the novel, Winston goes from writing 2 + 2 = 4 to tracing 2 + 2 = 5 in the dust. The change is not symbolic, it is real. What was once his act of rebellion has become his comfort. Orwell's genius lies not in the concept that truth can be denied, but that people can be made to forget how to recognize it. Truth is not fragile, but our relationship to it is. When systems of power reshape perception, facts dissolve into preference, and history becomes a shifting fiction. Winston's surrender is a mirror to modern societies. If we allow facts to become flexible, memory to be rewritten, and language to be corrupted, the future does not need to be imposed, it will be volunteered. Love, too, is exposed as something requiring freedom. The relationship between Winston and Julia is not destroyed by distance or disagreement. It is undone by fear. Room 101 turns their bond into a liability. After their betrayal, they meet again and speak of it plainly. "You don't feel the same," Julia says. "No," Winston agrees. "You don't feel the same." What Orwell reveals is heartbreaking. Without the ability to choose, love becomes meaningless. To love is to risk, to hope, to stand exposed. But in a world ruled by fear and surveillance, vulnerability is punished. And where vulnerability is not safe, love cannot survive. This transformation reveals more than just the methods of domination. It exposes the vulnerabilities we all share. And so Orwell's bleak vision leaves us not only disturbed, but reflective. What can be drawn from Winston's journey is not despair, but a cautionary mirror, a way to understand ourselves through the cracks of his collapse. Even memory is not safe. Winston remembers playing a game with his mother and sister, briefly, a moment of laughter before they disappeared. But by the end, he no longer trusts the memory. It might be real, or it might be invented. The party has not just taken away his future, it has corroded his past. Orwell is teaching us that memory, once manipulated, becomes a weapon. And when a society cannot remember what was, it no longer knows who it is. Identity requires history, and history requires truth. In the final scene, Winston is not tortured. He is not interrogated. He sits at the Chestnut Tree Cafe, drinking gin, listening to music, and contemplating a chessboard. White always mates, he tells himself. It is an illusion of order, of goodness. But in Orwell's hands, that illusion is sinister. White is not virtue, it is power. The party is the one that always wins. And Winston, once a dissenter, now finds peace in the certainty of defeat. This leads us to a deeper reflection. Peace itself can be deceptive. The absence of conflict does not mean the presence of justice. When Winston raises his glass to Big Brother, he is not being forced. He believes. He smiles. He weeps with gratitude. And that is Orwell's most terrifying insight. Not that people can be controlled, but that they can be made to love their control. What Winston gains in this moment is not joy but numbness. The constant gin, the meaningless job, the unchanging rituals, these become the structure of his life. He is not unhappy because unhappiness requires awareness. He is content, but it is the contentment of sedation. The contentment of someone who has forgotten how it felt to fight for something real. This is the kind of victory Orwell feared most. Not the victory of tanks or bombs, but the quiet, internal one where the final rebellion is not crushed, but abandoned. Orwell did not fear death. He feared surrender of the mind, and that is what Winston represents in the end. A man who has become what the system needs not because he was forced, but because he has been reshaped. And so the final words fall like a stone. He loved Big Brother. It is not just the end of Winston's journey. It is the end of resistance. The man who once sought truth, love, and freedom now embraces the very thing that destroyed them. He is not coerced. He is grateful. This is where Orwell's mirror turns toward us. Are we aware of the ways in which fear shapes our loyalties? Do we recognize when truth becomes entertainment and when history becomes convenience? Do we notice when love becomes unsafe to express? When silence becomes easier than speech? When survival becomes more important than conviction? Because 1984 is not only a story, it is a question. It asks whether we guard our memory, our language, our private thoughts. It reminds us that tyranny does not always arrive in uniform. It can come with applause, with news broadcasts, with comfort. It comes when we trade authenticity for safety, when we choose to believe what we are told because it is easier than asking why. Winston's story is not meant to leave us in despair. It is meant to awaken us before we reach the point where 2 + 2 = 5 is no longer a lie, but a comfort, before we begin to trace it into the dust ourselves. And if there is a final plea in Orwell's prose, it is this: resist the quiet peace of forgetting. Remember what it means to love freely, to speak truthfully, to think fearlessly. Remember that your mind, your memories, your love must never become property of the state, because the greatest tragedy of 1984 is not what was taken from Winston, it's that he gave it away. Winston sat alone, lost in thought, as the distant bulletin from the war front stirred something deep within him. Though the words were not yet spoken, He could sense a looming defeat for Oceania and Africa. His mind, dulled yet still capable of conjuring vivid images, saw the enemy sweeping down the continent in waves, like ants breaching a long-guarded frontier. Yet, even in this vision of doom, another image arose, one of counterattack and salvation. He imagined a mysterious force striking from the rear, cutting supply lines, restoring hope. In the isolated silence of the Chestnut Tree Cafe, as he moved the white knight across the chessboard, he felt for a moment as though the battle could be won, not on the battlefield, but through sheer will. But the moment faded as all moments did now. Winston's hand retreated, the knight returned to its place. His attention drifted, his mind circling back to the cruel equation carved into his soul, +2 = 5. He traced it in the dust, almost unconsciously. That simple, impossible assertion had come to define everything. "They can't get inside you," Julia had once said, but O'Brien had shown him otherwise. They could get inside you. They could reach the innermost parts of you and destroy them. There were acts from which no one could return. Something had been burned out of him, his resistance, his truth, his love. He had seen Julia again, briefly, by chance. It was March, bitterly cold. The ground was iron, the grass lifeless. She walked past him without emotion, and he followed without desire. There was no telescreen, though microphones surely listened. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered. She had changed her body, her spirit, her presence. She was like a stone, unresponsive to his touch. And in her eyes was a flicker of contempt, a silent condemnation he did not resist. They stood for a while among dead shrubs. They spoke, not with affection, but with weary recognition. Both had betrayed the other, and in doing so, both had lost the capacity to love. "You want it to happen to the other person," Julia said. "All you care about is yourself." Winston echoed her words, and they knew without needing to say more that what had once existed between them was gone. There was no real pain left, just cold, just emptiness. They parted, not bitterly, but indifferently. Winston returned to what remained of his life, a life lived among dust and gin and broken thoughts. At the Chestnut Tree Cafe, he existed like a ghost, his body moved by habit, not purpose. His world had narrowed to a chessboard, a newspaper, and a bottomless bottle. The gin was poison and medicine both. It numbed him to his own decay, offered a temporary resurrection each morning after nights of stupor. No one cared where he went. No one ordered him. His role at the Ministry of Truth was ceremonial, a member of a forgotten subcommittee that debated commas and brackets with desperate intensity on some days and dissolved into silence on others. His thoughts turned, as they often did, to false memories, traces of the past resurfacing uninvited. One memory, sweet and suspect, returned vividly. A rainy afternoon from childhood. He and his mother had played snakes and ladders under candlelight, a rare moment of joy before her disappearance. He remembered laughter, warmth, unity, but he pushed the image away. It was not real. It could not be trusted. Memories were lies unless the party sanctified them. Then a trumpet sounded from the telescreen. The war bulletin had arrived at last. The voice from the screen was jubilant, an ambush, a rout, a decisive victory. Cheers erupted outside. Winston, though unmoved physically, ran with the crowd in his mind. The white arrow on his mental map had struck the enemy's rear, just as he had imagined. The prophecy fulfilled, not by divine fate, but by the will of the party. And with that, the final piece of his soul fell into place. The equivocation was gone. He no longer questioned victory or defeat. He no longer questioned anything. The face of Big Brother looked down upon him, unchanging, omnipotent. Winston saw not a tyrant, but a savior. He remembered the ministry of love, where his rebirth began. There, under torture, in confession, in pain, He had been cleansed. The bullet, once dreaded, now symbolized redemption. He was ready for it, even welcomed it. Gin-scented tears marked his cheeks. 40 years it had taken, but at last he understood the meaning of the smile beneath Big Brother's mustache. It was not cruelty, it was love. Not tyranny, it was protection. Not repression, it was peace. He had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother. In the echo of that final revelation, he loved Big Brother. The past disintegrated like dust in Winston's glass of gin. Love, as the party defined it, was not a feeling born of affection, but a submission born of exhaustion. He did not remember the precise moment when the last seed of resistance died within him. It was not marked by a scream nor a gesture, but by silence. A silence so deep, so total, that even his thoughts had ceased to whisper dissent. Each morning as he dragged his aching body from the cot, the world reassembled itself with the same gray inevitability. The telescreen's bark, the lukewarm tea, the grinding hours at the cafe. Routine was no longer a burden, it was a mercy. Thought had become redundant. He listened, he watched, he nodded. When Big Brother spoke, Winston believed. Not because he understood, but because to disbelieve was no longer possible. He no longer dreamed of the Golden Country, nor of Julia's hand in the darkness, nor even of the book. The book, with its forbidden truths and its vanishing author, had become a memory without substance, like the faces in old photographs airbrushed by time, swept clean by the Ministry of Truth. His own role in the rebellion, too, faded into the murk of half-certainty. Had there truly been a brotherhood? Was O'Brien once a rebel or always the teacher? Did Julia ever believe, or was she a shadow sent to test him? None of it mattered. What mattered now was the beat of the music through the telescreen, the rhythm of slogans, the warmth of the gin, and above all, the gaze of that immense calm face. The final lesson was not in pain, but in peace, the peace of letting go, of surrendering completely. There was a strange serenity in it, a kind of spiritual death that promised no resurrection. The bullet, when it came, would be neither punishment nor mercy. It would be completion, fulfillment. In the last days, Winston had stopped looking for meaning. The world had become simple. The war was always going well. The enemies were always evil. Big Brother was always right, and he had always loved Big Brother. Sometimes he still visited the park, the same one where he had once held Julia. The crocuses had returned, but they no longer stirred anything in him. Beauty had been severed from feeling. He could admire a sunset without wonder, hear a song without memory. The emotional circuitry had been rewired, the old passions surgically removed. He sat often now beneath the spreading chestnut tree, a place of ghosts and confessions. The song would play again, softly, mockingly. I sold you and you sold me. But it no longer brought pain. It was history already written, already erased. The party had promised, we shall squeeze you empty, and then we shall fill you with ourselves. They had kept that promise. There was no longer a need to resist because there was no longer a self to resist. And so Winston Smith, once a man who dared remember, who dared love, who dared defy, had been undone not by fear but by faith. The kind of faith born in the dark, fed on silence, and sustained by the promise of safety. In that faith, he was finally reborn, not as a man, but as a citizen, not as an individual, but as an instrument. The cafe was nearly empty one afternoon when a voice from the telescreen declared a new campaign. Hate Week, extended indefinitely. Winston did not flinch. He raised his glass to the poster on the wall. The face watched him, eternal, unreadable. And in that moment, as the gin burned his throat and the telescreen droned on, Winston knew, truly knew, that nothing else had ever been real. Only this, only the party, only Big Brother. In the quiet murmur of the Chestnut Tree Cafe, Winston sat motionless, eyes fixed on the chessboard. yet mind drawn elsewhere. As news from the front loomed, his heart stirred. Something instinctual told him the report would be grim, a devastating loss in Africa perhaps, a decisive shift in a war that had no end. He imagined the Eurasian forces cascading down the continent like a swarm of ants, unstoppable and organized. But as he moved the white knight across the board in a flash of inspiration, it wasn't just a tactical play, it was a dream. A dream that somewhere, somehow, a counterforce would rise, mysteriously organized, striking the enemy's rear and cutting them off. He felt that by willing it, he was bringing that other force into existence. Yet it was not real, not even to him. His breath deepened with the weight of emotions layered inside him. Fear, hope, and resignation, each one jostling for space. But the spasm of hope passed quickly. He returned the night to its square. A new numbness settled over him. His fingers moved almost unconsciously, tracing the words in the dust. 2 + 2 = 5. Once a blasphemous equation, now it was a gospel he lived by. "They can't get inside you," she had said, once defiantly. But she was wrong. "What happens to you here is forever," O'Brien had said, and that Winston knew was the real truth. There were acts from which one could never recover, wounds that did not bleed but burned until nothing remained. He had seen Julia again, by chance, on a bleak March day when the wind sliced like a knife. She was walking alone in the park. Her figure changed, her steps slower, her shape thicker, her vitality drained. She did not speak as he followed her. There was no risk in being seen together now. No one cared. They ended up standing among leafless bushes, the crocuses at their feet, already defeated by the wind. When he put his arm around her, her body felt lifeless, more like a statue than a woman. Her silence was not resistance, but indifference. Her face was different, too pale, marked by a scar across the temple. But it wasn't the scar that had transformed her. It was something deeper, something irreversible. When she finally spoke, it was without emotion. "I betrayed you," he replied with the same words, hollow and rehearsed. She explained what had happened and how it had broken her. "Sometimes they threaten you with something you can't stand up to, and then you say, 'Do it to someone else.' You want it to happen to the other person. All you care about is yourself." Winston repeated her words. That was the truth now. Love had ended where terror began. They sat for a while on separate iron chairs, side by side but worlds apart. When she got up to leave, they said, "We must meet again." And again, yes, we must meet again. But it was not a plan. It was a script. He followed her for a while, dragging his feet through the cold, until he gave up and turned away. Not from her, but from the memory of who they had been. Back at the cafe, the air hummed with static from the telescreen, and the taste of gin burned more deeply than usual. The song began to play again, cruel and familiar. "Under the spreading chestnut tree, I sold you and you sold me." Tears came unbidden. They weren't for her. They weren't even for himself. They were for the knowledge that something sacred had been lost forever. Gin was now his companion, his sedative and his ritual. It carried him from morning stupor to afternoon haze. When he awoke, always late, his mouth scorched and body aching, he reached first for the bottle left at his bedside. It gave him life, but it was a poisoned one. He spent most of his days at the cafe, his presence unnoticed, unimportant. Occasionally, he visited a forgotten office in the Ministry of Truth, where he belonged to a subcommittee of a subcommittee. Their work was comically absurd, discussions about commas inside or outside brackets. The meetings were either instantly dismissed or dragged into absurd philosophical debates that meant nothing. Everyone on the committee looked like him, broken, faded, unnecessary. They worked sometimes, but never completed anything. Other times they sat in silence, staring at one another like ghosts waiting for the sun to rise. The telescreen fell quiet. Then came a trumpet blast. His heart jumped. Victory! A wave of noise burst forth. Cheers outside, a voice shouting inside. The war had turned. A surprise attack in Africa. Vast strategic maneuver-perfect coordination. 500,000 prisoners. Control of the whole of Africa. Victory, victory, victory. Winston's body didn't move, but in his mind, he ran with the crowds. He shouted, he cheered. 10 minutes earlier, he had doubted. Now there was no doubt, no ambiguity. The final piece had clicked into place. He looked up at the face of Big Brother, its calm omnipresence watching over all. This was no longer the face of fear. It was the face of salvation. He thought about that first day in the ministry of love. Much had changed since then, but one last change had not yet occurred until now. This was it. This was the healing. He drifted in a dream back to the white-tiled corridors, the armed guard, the confession, the forgiveness. Everything was pure now. Everything was light. And then finally, it came to him. He had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother. This closing line, though seemingly triumphant, is the novel's most tragic sentence. It encapsulates the complete annihilation of Winston's self. Love, the final frontier of resistance, has been converted. What remains is not a man, but a mechanism functioning exactly as the party intended. Orwell does not end 1984 with a rebellion or a hopeful whisper of freedom. He ends it with love, not for another human being, but for the oppressor. And that is the most chilling victory of all. This chapter is not merely a conclusion, it is a revelation. It shows how totalitarianism doesn't only destroy individuals, it recreates them. By manipulating truth, corrupting memory, dismantling language, and isolating love, it reconstructs reality itself. In the end, Winston no longer remembers what resistance felt like. He no longer feels guilt for betrayal. He no longer longs for Julia. He loves Big Brother. The lesson is universal and eternal. Truth matters, memory matters, love matters. When they are stolen, even quietly, even gradually, a person does not scream. A person forgets, and in forgetting they are lost. What makes Room 101 unforgettable is not merely the horror of rats or the sensation of doom it inflicts. It is its capacity to expose the ultimate vulnerability of the human spirit. Orwell does not offer a spectacle of torture for its own sake. He presents something more intimate and terrifying. The personal breaking point. Room 101 is not a universal place of pain. It is a mirror designed individually for each soul to reveal the one fear that strips away all masks, all convictions, all loyalties. For Winston, that fear is rats. For others, it may be fire, drowning, solitude. But the outcome is always the same: the destruction of the last refuge of self. Winston's final scream, "Do it to Julia, not me," is not a failure in logic or morals. It is a collapse deeper than betrayal. In that scream, Orwell shows us what it means to lose the ability to choose love over fear. It is not that Winston stops loving Julia in that instant. It is that he can no longer access the part of himself that loves it all. That part has been burned out. The betrayal is not strategic, it is sincere, and that is the most chilling success of the system. This moment forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. What would we do in Room 101? What part of our soul would we sacrifice to survive? And would we ever be able to recover it? From this hollow point of collapse, Winston is released not into freedom, but into sedation. He becomes a shadow of a man, drinking victory gin not to forget, but because there is nothing left worth remembering. He returns to the Chestnut Tree Cafe, the place where discarded men go to disappear without dying. He no longer rebels because rebellion requires desire, and he no longer desires. The memory of Room 101 lingers, not in his nightmares, but in the emptiness of his daily routine. The telescreen hums, the chessboard resets, and the news declares another victory. White always mates, Winston thinks, without irony. He is not playing chess anymore. He is playing belief, and belief now is obedience. Even when he sees Julie again, he feels nothing. Their love, once a fragile act of defiance, has been chemically and spiritually cauterized. "I betrayed you," she says. "I betrayed you," he answers. They say they should meet again, but they both know they never will. Not because they are forbidden to, but because they are no longer capable of meeting it. And then comes the final transformation. The news of Oceania's victory breaks through the telescreen, and Winston, motionless, watches. He does not need to cheer. Inside, he is already cheering. The last doubt fades, the last flicker of resistance dies. He looks up at the portrait of Big Brother and with tears of gratitude understands. He had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother. But what does it mean to love Big Brother? It is not affection. It is not admiration. It is erasure. It is the obliteration of the self so complete that the thing replacing it is not a lie, but a belief. Winston does not pretend to love. He truly, entirely, irrevocably loves the figure that destroyed him. Orwell does not end this story with defiance or escape. He ends it with an embrace, a quiet, inward, irreversible embrace of the oppressor. That is where the real warning lies. Totalitarian power, Orwell tells us, is not just about controlling actions or silencing words. Its final aim is to shape emotions, to rewrite memory, to engineer love. The greatest horror is not that the state forces you to say 2 + 2 = 5. It is that one day you begin to believe it. In the modern world, Room 101 may not have steel doors or wire cages, but it still exists. It exists wherever fear overrides compassion. It exists when convenience makes us forget truth. It exists when we stop asking questions and begin repeating slogans. When memory becomes optional and silence becomes instinctive, we enter that room without realizing it. This is why 1984 remains urgent. Orwell's dystopia is not defined by rockets or uniforms. It is defined by psychological surrender. And the path to that surrender is not always paved with violence. Sometimes it is paved with comfort, with slow forgetfulness, with routines that feel harmless until they consume us. There are lessons here that stretch beyond fiction. First, that truth is not invincible. It must be guarded. The moment we start accepting falsehoods for the sake of peace, we begin erasing our ability to discern. Second, that memory's identity. When we lose hold of our past, either by force or by neglect, we lose our ability to know who we are. Third, that love is fragile in a world ruled by fear. Real love requires risk, honesty, vulnerability, but fear punishes all three. Fourth, that resistance is not always grand. Sometimes it is simply remembering. Sometimes it is simply saying no, even in the smallest of ways. And finally, Orwell reminds us that surrender can feel like peace. That's what makes it so dangerous. When Winston lifts his glass to Big Brother, he is not faking. He is fulfilled. But fulfillment without freedom is not life. It is sleep. The kind of sleep from which a soul may never wake. 1984 is not a prophecy, it is a mirror. It reflects back what we allow, what we excuse, and what we forget. And in its final pages, as Winston gazes upward with love for his destroyer, Orwell leaves us with a question not for the characters, but for ourselves. What part of us will survive our own Room 101? And when that moment comes, will we still remember how to say 2 + 2 = 4? And so it ends, not with rebellion, not with love, but with surrender. As Winston gazes into the face of Big Brother, the last flicker of resistance dies. He has betrayed, he has forgotten, and at last, he loves Big Brother. But what does it mean to win when you've lost your soul? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, follow this channel to explore more powerful narratives that challenge the very core of what it means to be human.